Houston and Kansas, the top two teams in the AP poll, both lost at home this weekend. Who's the new number one? Andy Patton, is it Purdue or is it the Alabama Crimson Tide?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoops show out there. This is Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Schade. We are your co-hosts, and we want to thank you so much for joining us. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, who helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Coming up on today's show, we got to get you caught up on another crazy weekend of college basketball. All sorts of great stuff happening around the country, including Andy Patton. 3 of the AP top 5 falling this weekend. We're going to talk about each one of those, but we're going to start in the Big 12. And part of it is because everyone's paying attention to that top 4 in the Big 12 that played each other earlier in the week. Kansas, K-State, wow, Texas, and recently Iowa State. But lest ye forget, my friends, the TCU Horned Frogs still trying to find their way up off the mat after the college football season. Texas Christian University goes to Fog Allen Fieldhouse this weekend and obliterates Bill Self's Kansas Jayhawks 83-60. Andy, this is a great game to be able to start with because there's good stuff to be able to talk about with both teams, both the number 2 team in the nation losing at home and this TCU team that's a little bit of an afterthought in the best conference in all of college basketball. Where do you want to go with it?
Yeah, it's interesting. TCU kind of started the year out pretty rough. They had some injuries really early in the season. And there was kind of some are they actually as good as their preseason ranking? Is this a team that's legitimately going to compete in the Big 12? Because you can be a really good team and not finish in the top 3, in the top 5, in the top half of the Big 12 pretty easily. That's just how absolutely, I was going to say top heavy, but it's not even top heavy. It's just a straight up top to bottom.
It's just heavy.
Dominant basketball conference. What I loved about this game between TCU and Kansas here, whenever you see a victory like this, a blowout, an unexpected result, you usually see somebody stepped up in a way that you wouldn't have expected. And for this game, it was Shahada Wells, backup guard for TCU, a guy who's, Isaac, this guy's averaging 5 points per game. Last year, he only played a handful of games. He only averaged 2 points per game last year, 5 points per game this year. He goes into Fog Allen Fieldhouse, comes off the bench in 21 minutes, 17 points on 7 of 8 shooting, 3 of 4 from deep. It's always somebody like that, a guy you're not expecting is going to step up and have a monster night. This is a really nice victory for the Horned Frogs, a team that kind of needed some juice, needed some energy. They'd lost 3 out of 4 coming into this game. Again, Iowa State and Texas, 2 very legitimate losses, totally understandable to lose those 2 games. Other loss was to West Virginia. Again, not a terrible loss necessarily, among the worst losses you can have in the Big 12, but this is the Big 12. So, I think this loss, it says something about Kansas. Certainly we could talk about that, but I think it also just shows how tough the Big 12 is. And really, in a lot of ways, that this TCU team is not a team that's just going to go quietly in the night. They're a very, very good basketball team. And they're going to come out there and they're going to play some competitive basketball for the rest of the year without a doubt.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about how heavy the Big 12 is top to bottom. We've looked earlier in the season at how every team was like the top 40 or the top 50. At this point, we have 5 teams in the Big 12, all in the top 20 at KenPom. Kansas at 9, Texas at 10, Iowa State at 12, Baylor at 14, and TCU at 18.
Yeah.
All what on
ridiculous
earth? I mean, it's just insane to try to figure out. So you gave us the TCU side of things. Let's look at the Kansas side of things. We're going to get to our top 5s in a little bit here, folks. We got to unpack these top 3 losses, but on the Kansas side of it, I'm not going to move them down too far, Andy, and here's why. They've still only got 3 losses: Purdue, Alabama, K-State. Those are the only teams that have fewer amongst Power 5 schools. More importantly, only 2 schools in the nation have 7 quad 1 victories this season: Purdue and Kansas Jayhawks. So there's no point. Let's not overreact, even though they've now lost back-to-back games. We see teams hit a skid like this all the time. Now, when we get to our top fives, you're going to hear me not keep Kansas in my top five, and I haven't even looked ahead at yours yet because I wanted to be surprised. But I am definitely keeping Kansas in my top 10 because when I look at this, I'm looking at other teams around the nation, and we've got so much parity at the top. Like, who all would you want ahead of Kansas? Here's some possibilities: Houston, Alabama, Purdue, UCLA, Tennessee, Kansas State, Arizona, Virginia, Texas. That's 9, and you put Kansas in there with them. I'm taking Kansas over multiple of those teams, meaning that for me, Kansas is very much still a top 2 seed if the NCAA tournament started today.
Absolutely. I'd point out before we move on to talking about the other big loss, the Houston Cougars, we'll talk about them in a second, but I would want to point out real quick, Kansas last year, they lost to Kentucky. I believe it was by 25 points, something in that range. It was a 20-plus point loss to Kentucky. Do you know how Kansas responded to that game?
How did they respond?
The dang national championship. Bill Self's team is not going to lay down. They're not going to roll over. This is a tough loss. Again, a 23-point loss, but yeah, the Jayhawks are going to be fine.
Yes, they will be. Well,
go ahead.
Here's the other thing. We thought, that's all the big stuff happening on Saturday. But then we get to Sunday, and it's kind of honestly, Andy, a yawner of a slate until we look up mid-Sunday afternoon, and the number 1 team in the nation is in serious trouble, also at home, just like Kansas, against Temple. Houston is struggling with Temple. If you're Houston, you just cannot struggle with Temple, Andy Patton. Why? Because it's the whole Gonzaga effect of this thing, where the majority of the country assumes, you play in the AAC, or in Gonzaga's case, the WCC. And so you just should boat race every team you play always, especially when you're playing at home. But that's just not the case. For Houston, they had a nice comeback. They were down 55-48 with 6.5 minutes left in the game. And Temple did not score another field goal, had one more point, and it came from the free throw line. So, listen, great comeback from Houston. 7 straight points to tie it up at 55. And they had some looks, man. They had some looks right at the end. Jamal Shead got blocked at the rim, and then they had a nice blob play, baseline out of bounds play to get the ball to Tramon Mark right at the rim as time expired, and he just could not put it home. Andy, for you, somebody who talks about the Gonzaga-ification of this a lot, what do you think will happen as we see the new AP poll roll out this week with Houston?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Houston gets treated, in part because I think Gonzaga has helped buck this trend in a lot of ways. Early in Gonzaga's tenure, when they were a legitimate Cinderella team still, and a lot of people like to think about Gonzaga as being a Cinderella in 1999 and then some dominant force for like 20 years, and that's not what it has been for Gonzaga. Gonzaga wasn't really like a realistic candidate to win a national championship until something like 2015, 2016, when they obviously went to the national championship against some team from the East Coast that I can't recall right now. But I think Gonzaga has helped kind of, and the rise of analytics, of course, certainly with KenPom and Torvik and the net rankings to an extent, and how we use those numbers have kind of helped more casual college basketball fans start to understand this. But there's still a lot of people out there who will see that Houston lost to Temple, or will see that Gonzaga lost to LMU last week, even though LMU and Temple are both comparable teams. I think right now, as we're recording this, LMU's 94th in KenPom, Temple's 113th. So they're both fine teams, not as good as Gonzaga or Houston, not teams that either of those teams should lose to, not teams that Big 12 teams are even capable of losing to in conference play, because their whole conference is ranked higher than that in the KenPom rankings, but still fine quality teams. And my hope for Houston is that we don't see this fall as far as it might have happened to Gonzaga if they had suffered this loss 3 years, 5 years, 6 years ago. I think that we're starting to kind of come out of it a little bit, but it'll be interesting. Houston's been playing with fire a little bit. They've had a couple of really close games in conference play, and you score 55 points against an okay team like Temple, like that's not going to get it done. Like, you have to do more. As much as I'm trying to defend Houston, saying they shouldn't fall that far, and I believe that, they also played really bad in this game. It's 34% from the field. I think they shot barely over 50% from the free throw line. Like, they had an ugly ugly offensive game. And if anything's going to kill Kelvin Sampson's squad this year, it is that they are susceptible to having performances like this. But I don't think they should move down too far. I only moved them down a handful of spots. I know we'll get to that a little later, but yeah, it's when Kansas loses to a team like TCU, even when they get blown out, it's looked upon more favorably than when Houston loses to a team like Temple, even though one ball bouncing off the rim a little bit differently and the result's entirely different.
Yes, sir. Well, with the Houston side of things, I think you're right that there are going to be AP voters who move them down further than they should simply because of the AAC-ness of the whole thing.
Well, and then I guess the question kind of becomes, what do we do? What do we do with all these teams? How are we going to rank everybody here? How far should Houston fall? How far should Kansas fall? 3 of the top 5 teams lost this weekend. We've talked about 2 of them. We're going to talk about the UCLA Bruins next. But first, today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. You can identify those candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect them fast and for free. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications all on one platform. If you want to achieve your business goals in 2023, and hiring the right team member is going to help you do exactly that. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Isaac, we had 3 top 5 teams lose over the weekend. We talked about Kansas and their loss to TCU. We talked about Houston and their narrow loss to Temple and what that might mean for them. The other team was the UCLA Bruins. Mick Cronin's squad has been on an absolute roll through the Pac-12. The Pac-12 is a conference famously known for cannibalizing themselves and having not so good teams beat good teams, and Arizona has fallen victim to that. They lost their opening game to Utah. They also lost to Washington State. That has kind of curtailed some of the momentum around Tommy Lloyd's squad. But you know the best way to get that momentum back? Go out and beat the best team in the conference. And that's what they did, 58-52. It was a low-scoring, grinded-out affair. And now UCLA, again, they were 5th coming into this game. Arizona was 11th. That's not a bad loss. It's not a bad loss. There's some concerns about Mick Cronin's squad, certainly, and seeing them only put up 52 points in this game, even against a solid Arizona team, is a bit concerning. But at the end of the day, you know, you look at the other 2 losses that those top 2 teams take. You're going to take this one. This is far and away the best loss out of that group, at least in my mind. I'm curious what you think.
Yes, sir. I agree with you. For the Arizona side of it, they came into the Arizona, hosting the LA schools there in Arizona, having lost 2 of 3, as you just referenced, to Wazoo and then to Oregon as well. And so they really, really needed one, if not both of these wins, and they went out and got it. This win is more important for Arizona, clearly, than it would have been for UCLA. UCLA is going to come out of this fine. We talked last week on the show, Leaf Tulane and I did, about which of the 4 schools of the 2 Arizona and 2 LA schools needed or would come out of this weekend looking the best. And it's UCLA because of just their ample lead in the conference. But it's Arizona that serves themselves the best this weekend and puts themselves in the best shape, did the most for themselves. Because when we look at the Pac-12 race, Andy, let's imagine a different world where UCLA had won this game, right? Had they done so, the Bruins would be 9-0 in the conference. Arizona would be 5-4 in the Pac-12. In that scenario, UCLA has a 3-game conference lead over Utah, USC, Arizona State. Instead, though, because Arizona gets that win, UCLA's lead is only now 2 over those schools and Arizona. Now, I think UCLA is going to still walk away with this thing and laugh at everybody along the way. But it is no longer the runaway that it could have been. So Arizona not only got themselves a big win, but for me, changed the tenor of the Pac-12 race. Because one of the things I've talked about multiple times now, and Andy, we've talked about it on the show, is Pac-12 this year is not going to be won between Arizona and UCLA in their head-to-heads.
Yeah.
It's going to be won by what they do against the other 10 schools. To wit, at this point when we're recording, UCLA is 8-0 against the other schools. Arizona is 5-3, and that's why the Bruins have the lead they do.
Unquestionably, yeah. I think that's the biggest thing that's going on with UCLA right now is just taking care of business. They're taking care of business. A loss to Arizona, you can stomach that, but they're taking care of business against Wazoo, against Utah, against teams that Arizona, quite frankly, not taking care of business against. One of the craziest things about this week, we talked about 3 out of 5 of the top 5 teams, losing. 6 of the top 10 teams lost this last week as well. It's been a week of a lot of turnover. Isaac, as you and I start to look at our top 5s here for this week.
Yes, here we go.
It was a little bit harder to do with so many top teams losing. We talked about Houston losing. We talked about Kansas losing. Purdue and Alabama, they did not take any losses. UCLA, of course, we already covered them. Going down the list again, Gonzaga lost to LMU. That was a tough one for the Zags. Texas lost on Tuesday to Iowa State. Xavier lost at DePaul. That was a tough one for the Musketeers. And then Tennessee and Virginia rounding out the top 10. They didn't suffer any losses. So I want to take a look at where my top 10 is and kind of how we were able, or top 5, how we were able to move some of those teams around. And I'm staying put with the Alabama Crimson Tide as the number 1 team in the nation. It is very close for me between Alabama and Purdue. Purdue is, of course, who I have at number 2. Very close. I hemmed and I hawed and I wrote it a different way, and then I changed my mind and I wrote it a different way again. Purdue went into Tom Izzo's house and won last week. That is hard to do. That is a difficult victory for them to pick up. But Alabama didn't have a bad week either. They took care of business against the teams they needed to take care of business. They beat Mizzou badly. They're just rolling right now. They're absolutely rolling. So for me, I'm still leaning Crimson Tide over Purdue, but it's very, very close. This is where I had Houston. Bump them down to number 3. Again, I think a lot of people out there are probably going to move them down quite a bit further, whether it's on their fictional ballots, whether it's on real ballots for some of the AP voters out there who may not respect the conference as much as maybe some other people do. But for me, Houston's still a top 3 team in the country. And then for me, I moved Virginia all the way up to 4. Virginia's been really solid this year. They don't really have any terrible losses. They didn't take any L's last week. I'm having them all the way up at number 4. I think we're going to have another ACC team back here in the top 5, despite the fact that the ACC has been a bit of a confusing mess, to say the least, this season. And then, as you kind of alluded to, it's hard to bump Kansas all the way out of the top 5. So I have Kansas holding steady at number 5, with UCLA, Kansas State, Texas, Tennessee, and even Arizona. After picking up their win, they're kind of all right in that conversation for the rest of the top 10, and kind of in the conversation for top 5.
I've got the exact same 10. I've just got them in a different order. Outside of Andy, we are aligned on our top 3. Last week, if I remember correctly, our entire top 5 were identical to one another. I am with you. I think Alabama has done enough for me to warrant continuing to stay above Purdue. Now, if one of them does something different, cool, we can talk about it. But for me, there was no reason to flip them from what I already had. Plus, Bama is doing to teams right now what UConn did earlier this season. 8-game winning streak since they lost to Gonzaga, every one of them by double digits. I love what the Crimson Tide are doing. Purdue has looked a little more vulnerable to me, and we're nitpicking here, but you got to if we're talking these 2 great teams at the top. I did the same thing. Houston's at 3rd for me. And then I rewarded Kansas State just because it's so cool. We'll talk more about them in a little bit, but I'm putting the Wildcats all the way up at number 4. And then despite their loss, I've got UCLA at 5. Following that is that same group, just a couple different teams. Tennessee, Texas, Kansas. I moved them down to about 8-ish is where I think I would have them, along with Arizona and Virginia, all in that 6 to 10 range. I didn't specifically rank them, but boy, Andy, so many teams capable of winning this whole blessed thing. That's part of what's making this year incredible in college basketball.
Well, it's time for quick hitters now as we wrap up every Monday show with several ACC and SEC things to get to, plus more movement on the all-time Division I scoring list. But we've got some Big 12 updates first.
Yes, Andy, I just said a second ago that I wanted to say more about K-State. Texas Tech comes into Manhattan, the Little Apple, on Saturday. This game itself, whatever, yawn, 68-58 Kansas State. Texas Tech still winless in Big 12 play. But here's why I want to mention it. With the Wildcats win, plus Iowa State lost at Oklahoma State, again, it's the Big 12, and the Kansas loss we already talked about. Here's what it means. You ready, folks? The team picked dead last in the Big 12 preseason poll now has sole possession of first place in the conference. And we're not talking about just 2 or 3 games in, right? We're way far into conference play. And we're not just talking about some rando conference. This is the best conference in all of college basketball. And the team picked dead last is leading this thing. That is a story that is worth talking about all day long.
The next game that we wanted to talk about here is an ACC matchup, a fun ACC matchup. We thought there might be a upset here. It's a little bit unique to call this game an upset. That is Miami at Duke. Miami was ranked 17th coming into the game. Duke, of course, unranked in a surprising kind of turn of events for the Blue Devils, having some struggles with some of their freshmen. Jeremy Roach had been hurt for a long time, but guess what? Duke pulls out a really nice victory at Cameron Indoor, in part because Jeremy Roach came back. Roach has been a kind of a polarizing player in Duke's history for a lot of reasons, but you know what? He was the reason that Duke won this game, without a doubt. He played fantastic off the bench, really kind of helped against Miami's guards. Isaiah Wong had a really bad game here. He had 7 points on 2 of 8 shooting. Roach comes off the bench again, 27 minutes, 14 points for him. Kyle Filipowski had another double-double because that's what he does, 17 points and 14 rebounds for him. As good, I guess, for those of you out there who love the Duke Blue Devils, good to see them get a victory here. Canes had a lot of opportunities to win this one and just couldn't close the door at the end of the game, and the Blue Devils came away with a victory.
Yes, they did. Sticking around in the ACC, Virginia Tech, who unfortunately for them is much better than their 1-6, 1-7 conference record would suggest, comes into Clemson on Saturday. Clemson, number 19 in the nation, leading the ACC with just 1 conference loss. And Clemson is just able to barely hang on to this victory, 51-50. And for Clemson, they have to do this if they want to keep maintaining respect in the eyes of any voters, because this is the team, and we talked about them last week, who people are very anxious to downvote and get out of there. Now, for Clemson, Chase Hunter misses the game. He's their second leading scorer. Alex Hemingway, who's been out, continues to be out. And so, there's that side of it for Clemson. But I'm still not sold on the Tigers as holding on to this thing the whole way. Give me Virginia. We've talked about them and where we believe them to be. Yeah. I think when all is said and done, the Cavs will be standing atop the ACC.
Next game I want to talk about here is Texas A&M at Kentucky. John Calipari's squad held steady at home, pulled out a victory, 76-67. The big thing that's going on with Coach Kyle's team is we've seen them make an adjustment to the starting lineup, starting Cason Wallace over the veteran guard Severe Wheeler. It was because of an injury. It has now happened 3 straight games, and quite honestly, they're a better team because of it. It's clear from the eye test. It's clear from the analytics. I know Evan Mia does some rankings of teams' lineups, and clearly, it looks like Kentucky is a better basketball team when they have Cason Wallace in the game. That was the case in this game. They're 3-0 since they made the change to the starting lineup. Obviously, this is a team that has had some very good highs this year, including the win over Tennessee, some tremendous lows as well. It seems like Cal's squad's starting to figure it out, and maybe it took an injury for the adjustment to happen, but maybe that's a bit of a blessing in disguise, as this team looks like they're in fairly good shape heading into February.
We move now to the ACC, move back to the ACC, I should say, where NC State visited North Carolina, one of those bitter rivalries on Tobacco Road. North Carolina comes out with an 80-69 victory, but this is notable, this game, for 2 reasons. The ACC's leading scorer and probable lottery pick, Terquavion Smith, takes a hard fall after a foul from Leaky Black in transition. Leaky Black was actually assessed a flagrant 2 and ejected from this game. Many people are, I've seen lots of debates, Andy. People are big mad trying to figure out who was wronged here. Is it the Wolfpack or was it North Carolina? Mm-hmm. Who knows? Anyway, he leaves this game with 9 and change left. North Carolina was in control already, but this certainly did not help the Wolfpack's case in coming back. Thankfully, reports are that Terquavion Smith is good. He was carted off the court on a stretcher, and apparently all is good because he was out clubbing on Saturday night, and there are pictures floating around Twitter if you want to see it. As for the North Carolina side of it, the reason we bring it up on theirs is Armando Bacot, ACC preseason player of the year, set 2 career North Carolina records in this game, passing the great Tyler Hansbrough to become North Carolina's all-time rebounding leader with 1,221 at this point. Also moves into 8th place on the ACC list and moves into 1st place in Carolina history for career double-doubles with 61, passing Billy Cunningham, nicknamed the Kangaroo Kid.
Well, we go to the SEC now, where Auburn went on the road at South Carolina and pulled out a victory. Look, the Gamecocks, not a great team. Auburn has not been a good team on the road, though, so it's nice to see them go out and pick up a victory there. 5 straight wins for them. 3 of the last 4 have been away games. So again, as a team that struggled really early in the season on the road, they have now started to look much better under Bruce Pearl. They're now 16-3 on the season, 6-1 in conference play. KenPom loves this team. They've loved them all year long. They've had them consistently around the top 20, top 25. They're 17th right now. Defense is 11th in adjusted defensive efficiency. Again, at KenPom, a calling card for Bruce Pearl's squad. However, as much as Auburn looks like, they got some of the same momentum they had last year when they were obviously very, very good with Walker Kessler and Jabari Smith, but I'm not sure I know what to make of this team yet. They haven't played Alabama. That's a huge, huge, huge matchup for them. They haven't played Tennessee, obviously a fantastic matchup, and they haven't played Kentucky. So we're looking at an Auburn team that has more or less feasted on the bottom half of the SEC. I think they're a good team. I'm not sure that they're a great team, but we're going to learn a lot more about this team when they take on a couple of those marquee SEC opponents in the next couple of weeks.
Yes, absolutely. The closing gauntlet for Auburn, Andy, their final 3 regular season games at Kentucky, at Alabama versus Tennessee. Yikes. That is a way to end the regular season, and we will certainly know a ton about the Tigers by them War Eagle. Antoine Davis, we talked about him on last week's show from Detroit Mercy, moved up last week into 3rd place on the NCAA's career scoring list. This weekend, we talked about they played Ooey Pooey, the Jaguars out of Indianapolis. Our guy Antoine Davis drops 42 in this game, Andy, 8 of 18 from 3. So now he is only behind Pistol Pete Maravich, who he ain't catching him. Ain't nobody catching this dude. Antoine Davis, 2nd on the list, 3,274 career points. Well done, Mr. Antoine Davis.
Now, the final game we want to talk about here is Charleston. Charleston's win streak is now up to 20. They beat Northeastern 87-61. They are 21-1 right now, a fantastic run for this squad. Only loss was a 102-86 loss to North Carolina. Not a bad loss by any stretch of the imagination for any team. Certainly not a bad loss for a mid-major team like Charleston. It's been fantastic to see this team continue to go on this run. They have 9 regular season games remaining. They are favored in every single one of these games, so we could see a 30-win season from Charleston, a fantastic season from them. That's going to do it for us today, Isaac. That is a fantastic way to end our show. Love talking mid-major basketball. For those of you out there, if you want to like, subscribe, check out the show wherever you get podcasts. You can also find us on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Locked On College Basketball, hit that big red subscribe button. Until next time, peace out.
Peace.